Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. Now, this episode was specifically asked for by some of our Patreon subscribers, and we would like to thank them first and foremost for helping us keep the podcast going, because we don't get any funding from the main party. We just all do this as volunteers, and people like Sam, who's on again this week, we have to, I have to reward him with, various treats just to keep him going. So thank you so much, everyone that does that, and thank you to everyone who follows us on all our social media as well. My name is John Potter. I host the Lib Dem Podcast, and I'm a triple-hatted councillor here in Preston. Now, the triple hat is very important because this episode we are talking about parishes or local councils, and we'll come back to it because the definition of a parish can be very wide and varied. But let me introduce our panel first. Coming back again, Sam has been on many times in this podcast. He's a regular. Sam Al-Hamdani from Oldham. Welcome to the podcast again, Sam.
Hello, and welcome from Saddleworth, where I am also on the parish council, as well as Oldham Borough Council.
Wonderful. And we've got two first-timers, so me and Sam will have to, keep them on a lead in case they misbehave or anything like that. So I'll introduce the one I know best first. Joining us from just across the way in Preston, the posh part of Preston, is Alderman Bill Shannon, who was a councillor here in Preston and was also a parish councillor as well. Were you, Bill, or did you...
Possibly that's something we need to discuss a bit later. I was a parish councillor during the period before we actually set up the parish council. It's a bit complicated, this, but the main reason I'm here is because I went through the process of creating, if that's the right word, a parish council, a neighbourhood council, the first suburban one in Preston. And as you say, I stood down from the Preston City Council in 2014 and was made an honorary alderman, which,
And our second new speaker, and welcome to the podcast, is Mike Drew, who we've allowed to come all the way, I think, from just outside of Bristol. Is that correct, Mike?
That is correct, yes. My name's Mike Drew. I'm councillor on Yate Town Council. I used to be a triple-hatted councillor until they abolished the county of Avon, and then I'm only a double-hatted now. I'm on South Gloucestershire Council as well. I was first elected in 1983 when we took over Yate Town Council as a Liberal-run council with some SDP colleagues at the time, and we've been continuously running Yate Town Council ever since. We've had no opposition councillors this century. That's a phrase I love saying.
And Mike, you're also the vice chair of the National Association of Local Councils. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes, I've been vice chair for 2 years, and I've just been elected for another 2-year term.
Wonderful. Well, I suppose, Mike, you're probably the first, but the ideal person to talk to is because there'll be some people who have no idea, absolutely no idea, what is a parish council? Because that is probably the term that people most use. What is a parish council?
The parish council is the most local level of local government. Parishes were set up in 1894 when they took over many of the functions what used to be the parochial church parish, and also things like the poor law responsibilities, etc., which were separately elected bodies then. In fact, now parish councils can also be called town councils. There are some city councils. Some name themselves as community councils, particularly in Wales, where they are called community councils. We do have also community councils in Scotland, but they have very little power because they have no fundraising ability. Parish councils, like other elements of local government in England and Wales, can preset on the council tax for any sum of money which they feel is necessary to run their town stroke parish, and that has to be paid by the district stroke unitary authority, and it is then apportioned according to the council tax band which householders are in.
So let's just dive into that. So what's interesting is, and most people assume when they think of parish councils, leafy villages with, a little kind of parish council that makes sure the fences aren't over 5 foot high or something of that kind of idea. But actually, what we're going to talk about in this episode is actually the multitude of powers and excellent work parishes can do. And just in case people don't know what a precept is, because I understand, again, some people might know, that is a little extra levy that they put on council tax that each member of the electorate, its household, beg your pardon, in that particular area will pay a little charge. So that could be 20p every month, or it could be whatever the parish council decides. So we will call this a parish. I will keep referring to parish council, but like Mike just said, they could be community, neighbourhood, town councils, city councils, even. So Sam, you are a current one. What are the main advantages of a parish? Why are they needed? Why do we need another layer of democracy?
It's not so much about wanting another layer of democracy. It's about putting certain elements of our democracy as close as we can to people, so that we can deal with those local issues at the most appropriate level, so that we can really engage with the community, and so that we can deliver things that are really targeted to that community. I think one of the most important powers. I'm in the middle of my parish council. We're delivering a neighbourhood plan. And that is basically taking the planning powers that we have across the borough that are sort of delegated down from national and making a really focused version of that for our community. And it has powers beyond that. I think it's a really important thing that parish councils do. You can do it without a parish council, but it really informs and guides what we're doing. And for us, like for the next 20 years, this is going to be our focus of, the nitty gritty of what we're doing in our area.
Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Praetor Reigns. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Praetor Reigns have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Praetor Reigns are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Praetor Reigns website at praetorreigns.co.uk/liberal-democrats. Just to give a kind of wider context to listeners before I bring Bill in, is that there are over 10,000 local parish councils in England alone, which actually invest over £1 billion worth of money into their communities. So they're incredibly powerful. So Bill, you went about trying to set up one. So why did you even think it was necessary to set up a parish council in an area that already had a county and a borough council?
Well, the reason we went about it is because in the early years of this century, if you remember, there was something called the area base grant, which provided national monies to help deprived areas through something that was called neighbourhood management, which was a means of bringing together the various stakeholders with quite significant sums of money to be spent in local areas. And in Preston, there were two of these areas were set up in mine in England, Tanton, was set up in 2006. And then you remember 2008 happened, and then 2010, and the world changed. And all of a sudden, from having quite a significant amount of money to be spent locally on local things for local people, that the rug was pulled out from under our feet. So we, the councillors and some residents, members of Residents Association, etc., we said, look, the only way we can go back to what we'd been building was through a parish council. And so we went about the process of setting up a parish council. Yeah. And
so, Mike, what kind of advantages do you see in a parish council? Because actually the amount of powers they have, and again, Sam and Bill chip in with what you think are the most significant ones, because again, the default is, and I've heard it directly from Labour councillors who don't have parish council in Preston saying, you're just about potting plants. It's about having nice hanging baskets in leafy Tory kind of room. But actually the powers that a parish can have are quite extraordinary, actually.
Yes, they're very wide. Basically, you can do provided your council qualifies for the general power of competence. You can do anything that any individual can do,
yes,
but you can do it with the resources of the whole town, village, community, whatever it is. For example, I don't know whether we're being broadcast on YouTube or whatever, but behind me is a youth cafe and a youth venue and cafe, we call it. It's the Armadillo. It was cost £1.5 million to build. We built it jointly with then South Gloucestershire Council, who then wanted to withdraw from providing youth services. So we had a good deal with them. It said if they withdrew, the building became entirely ours instead of just half ours. And so we spend something like £250,000 a year on youth services within the town. That's more than South Gloucestershire did spend for the whole of the authority.
Just repeat that figure again for us, Mike.
Yeah.
I think it's worthwhile just pointing out how much do you spend on youth services then?
We spend £250,000 a year on youth services, and that's through the youth cafe, through outreach youth workers, other youth centres. With the advantage that we have, we can say, unlike the normal youth centre, which runs 5 evenings, usually 4 evenings a week. They don't operate weekends and they don't operate outside the term time. We, in fact, we don't work Saturdays because we found that the young people didn't want Saturdays. But in theory, we could operate 7 days a week all year round.
Yeah.
And that's, we have that freedom to do things. We don't have to follow the youth curriculum, which straitjackets many youth centres.
Yeah.
And that's just one of the many things that we do. We are not constrained by having to do things. The only duties that parish council has is to maintain closed churchyards. We don't have one, and to provide allotments if they're demanded within your community.
Yeah.
We don't have any of those. So we are in the process of providing some, but everything else is entirely at our discretion. And that's the. I'm a South Gloucestershire councillor as well, but I can feel I can achieve far more through the 8 town councils than I can with South Gloucestershire Council.
Yeah, and especially, and go on, Bill, you were about to come in.
I'd love to have that much money to spend, but I mean, one of the I always think of it in a way as being a bit like when you're a kid, your parents provide a roof over your head and feed you and clothe you and give you food and buy the necessities, but you also have pocket money, and that's your discretionary spend. And I hope it's not sort of playing it down too much to say that's what we're talking about. We're talking about money that's raised locally to be spent locally upon local priorities. And that's the key thing. And I think, it can look like, they just spent the money on planters, but actually having a few planters around the access points, it's part of pride of place. It's one of the first things we did was actually put signs up on each of the roads going in saying England Tanterton. We gave it an identity, perhaps that it didn't have before. We also, and again, I don't know if you do this, Mike, but we have a Lanksman who is a paid employee who goes around the area. He will ensure that graffiti is removed. He'll look after fly tipping. He does sort of small scale hedge and tree work, this sort of thing. And again, it's all about pride of place. And I think this is a very important side of it. Now, yes, one of the first things we did was to actually see if there was a demand for allotments, this sort of thing. But we're also looking at what could we do to improve broadband and cable within the area, things like this. And perhaps one of the most important things, although it maybe not register, is the right to be consulted on all planning applications. And this is really important. And the number of planning applications where members of the parish council have gone along and spoken very powerfully, and often with the result of getting an inappropriate development turned back. So, there are all of those things. And just finally looking at your armadillo behind you there, Mike, in our area, there are 2 community centres already in existence, and particularly during COVID, the financial support that the neighbourhood council has given to those two, effectively underwriting their overheads during this very difficult period, has been absolutely crucial to keeping us going.
Because Sam, I mean, and that's, we talked about a little bit there of some of the big things like keeping community centres open, building community centres, getting youth services, but also parishes and local councils can run events. Some of them run bus services, you know, some of them run, I remember back in Cheshire and Amersham, which is again a very competitive parish council, they run a sports facility. There are, as well as Bill says, an important block on, say, making sure planning is taken into account. There we go. See, and Mike, I didn't know you had a photo for every single thing. So for the people who are listening rather than watching, Mike is changing his background to show all the various stuff that his particular parish has done. But Sam, it's an incredible opportunity. And for someone like me, who has been, you know, a borough councillor for 11 years, I'm now in my second term as a county councillor, I don't want to say the ease of which, but the lack of hoops you have to go through to be able to get something done. I mean, and I think in particular in our patch, just installing a new defibrillator right next down, right outside a playing area that people play football on at the weekend, things like that, which it would take you a proper amount of effort, time and nagging to get from any of the other councils. Within a parish, it was remarkably easy to do it and still be able to levy funding, so you know, whether it's match funded and things like that. So it's incredibly powerful, isn't it, Sam?
It really is. I mean, I think it does depend on the parish council, and it depends on what you're doing. I think we talked at the start, you know, just the descriptions of parish councils, the wide range of what parish councils are. I mean, I don't know what size the councils are. For me, my parish council is a population of 27,000 people, and it's actually, geographically, it's half the area of the borough. You know, it's massive. But whereas you can get parish councils that are really small, and really the power of what you've got will depend on, you know, exactly what kind of a parish council it is, who you're working with, what your budget is. You know, there is money that comes down to parish councils from central government via the local authority. That said, there are a few councils. Well, there are a few councils in the country that don't do that, and mine is one of them. It's an ongoing battle to get that funding. So, you know, it's finding the way in which your particular parish council can have that effect, but you can then leverage that really well. And so, you know, different parish councils will specialise in different things. They may have taken on different responsibilities, but if you find what yours can do and do well, then it is a really effective way of getting to grips with that.
I think it goes without saying we should actually just have a little, because this has been very pro-parish, and all councils come with issues, okay? And I think it's important to recognise that, okay? So for some people, the most obvious one is that extra little bit of council tax that people have to pay. There will some people who just don't want any extra money going out of their pocket, and that's something that all parishes have to deal with. At what level to set that precept? You know, are they happy? But then I suppose then it's down to people like us who are advocates of parish council to say, well, actually, that defibrillator that's going to save someone's life, that crossing that's now on that road, that community centre that's kept open wouldn't be. And we say to our opponents, if you want to close down this parish council, then you're putting them at risk, I suppose. But what other kind of disadvantages do people get, or how do you deal with that big one about the extra levy, the precept? I mean, I'll go on, Bill. I think you want to come in then.
Well, I mean, I think that one has been brought into quite sharp focus because in Preston, since we set up the neighbourhood council, there has been a boundary revision. And the parish council's boundary, the neighbourhood council's boundaries now cross across other wards on the district council. And that means that some people within John's ward pay the parish precept and some don't. And you know, people living in next door roads will say, well, my God, I'm paying an extra £1 a week compared to them. What am I getting for it that they don't? And I think we'll come back to the sort of, you know, the question of how we extend parish councils to a wider area later. But I mean, it is obviously very difficult to answer that question, because often the money is not necessarily being spent in that street. It's being spent for the greater good, and that might mean it's all being spent in the northern half of the this year we spent it up there rather than down there. This sort of thing. So I mean, there are clearly problems, and I think one of the answers to those has got to be communication. It's essential, and I'm sure John won't mind me saying, I don't think we do it well enough. I don't think we communicate anything like well enough what we are achieving in the parish area. I think I'll come back to that other point later. Go on.
Okay,
yeah.
No problem. So, Mike, I'm very curious, because obviously I don't know what's the population of your particular council?
It's about 25,000.
That's large.
Yeah.
So the one that Bill's talking about that I sit on is 3,500 houses. So
3,500 houses, about 5,000 voters. It's a ward effectively within a city.
Yeah.
But it still means, when we set it up, we set the precept at from memory £12 a year. It's now for Bandy, it's gone up a lot since then. It's now working out at about £50 a year, so it's about £1 a week. That's the sort of precept. But £1 a week across 3,500 homes brings in £100,000, and allowing a little bit to be spent on a clerk and a little bit to be spent, on other technical things like that. It's a significant sum of money for discretionary spend, either to be spent in that year or some of it to be set aside for capital expenditure in future years.
It's a long time ago now, but not long after we took over Yatetown Council, a factory in the town closed down, and the site was going to be redeveloped for housing. Mm-hmm. And in the middle of this factory, those who can see behind me, there was a building called Paul Court, which was used as an office block for that factory. A lot of people didn't know it existed because they had big walls around the factory. However, we saw it and said, well, that actually, why let that be pulled down as well, just to put a bit of open space? We'll take that on, and we bought it for £1. We then have to spend £400,000 to refurbish it, and we use it for our town council offices. It was used for a long time as the county council's registry office. We hold small weddings in there, and we let out rooms to charities, etc. And this was we thought was a controversial thing at the time, and we did conduct a local poll and consultation, and the public supported it. We had a county council election the following year, and all that county council election was about was, because I was the county councillor for most of Yate at that time, was this: we had to double our rates, how long ago, to be able to pay for it. And all that county council election was about was the doubling of rates by Yate Town Council. I doubled my majority. People appreciated what we could do.
Yeah.
Now, Sam, you do a lot of work on messaging, etc., particularly regarding campaign messaging. So I suppose it is just showing the benefits is the key thing about it, on getting that message across.
Yeah, and as has been said before, I think a lot of parish councils don't do that very effectively. And it is harder to do with, you don't have some of the big ticket things that you have on larger councils to shout about. So you have to be very aware of, the whole point of a parish council. We talked about it before. It's bringing democracy down to the level where you're working close to people. And so what you're trying to do with that messaging is showing, what that sort of granularity, what that detail means, and why it's embedded in the community. So it's lots. I mean, and that really does fit with Liberal Democrat values. We talk about community right at the top of the bill, and this is a way in which you can really do it. So you should be thinking as a parish councillor, I think, all the time about community. Of those kind of like headline values. Parish councils are all about the community, and it's all about just showing how we can work together as a community, and these smaller projects, but which can have a really day to day, you Bill was talking about, pride of place. Like, it's not a measurable thing, but it really can, having that little bit more pride in where you live can really bring a lot on a just everyday basis to the people who are there. So if you can bring that across and keep talking about that, find different ways of being involved in the communities and getting that message out, whether you're doing the big advertising thing or just working with the community, that it will make people value that parish council, but also value the Liberal Democrat value of community.
So, Sam, what's a parish clerk? It was mentioned. Like who is the parish clerk?
Other people may be better on the specific definition. It's usually almost it's the person who basically is employed to do the work of the parish council, to look after things. And now, I think this doesn't have to be the clerk, but they are also the legal officer, who basically, if there is any question of, are we legally allowed to do this, that's their responsibility to say yes or no. So in our case, we have a wonderful lady who sits at the side, minutes the meetings, responds to those things, and then we send her away to get on with coming back to us with information or like practically doing stuff and assigning roles to. We have a number of staff, combination of part-time staff, and she manages those in that role as well.
And the chief executive. Sorry, we've got this far without mentioning Jackie Weaver, but that technically is actually what Jackie's role is. I don't know if you were going to say there an administrator. Were you going to say there, Mike?
Well, the clerk is the chief executive of your council. Obviously, it's the only employee. It's a bit grand to call them chief executive. Certainly, some councils, particularly large ones, do entitle their clerk that. But the clerk is defined within the Local Government Act 1972. Everything about parish councils is all defined in the 1972 Local Government Act, as amended umpteen times. Jackie Weaver actually is not a town clerk or clerk. She is actually an employee of the Cheshire Association of Local Councils. She was just assisting the parish council because they lost their clerk, so she was.
I wonder why they lost their clerk. I mean, that is.
Well, yes.
Because I wonder that. I mean, Bill, that was obviously shines a light on one of the other disadvantages of parish councils is that all the numpties you get in every other council also apply to parish councils. Well, you will get people.
I was going to throw in there when you were asking about the downside, and the downside is. I mean, there's a word for it, parochialism. I mean, this is one of the big problems. I mean, when we set up the England Untitled Neighbourhood Council, we deliberately, as a matter of policy, said it was not going to be political, that people were not going to stand on party political tickets. It was going to be members of the public standing as members of the public, representing the community and so on and so forth. And regrettably, it didn't work. It didn't work for a whole pile of reasons to do with, as I say, parochialism, people getting stuck in and not approving anything that didn't apply to their street,
you can be very clear and say there were awkward buggers that just wanted their own stuff and didn't want to do anything.
There were awkward buggers who would walk out. No, I'm not getting into this. But the fear of But what I was going to say just about parish clerks before we pass on from that, the parish clerk is there to carry out the lawful orders of the parish council. They're not members of the parish council. Then they don't have equal status. They can advise, but at the end of the day, the council can go against their advice, and providing it's lawful, they've got to get on with it, whether they like it or not. And that's sometimes hard to get.
And one of the drawbacks is there are a lot of very small parishes, which often don't resource themselves adequately to have a well-trained clerk or to pay that clerk enough hours to do the job for them. And those, the odd thing is the parishes which most concerned about not spending money are the ones who overwork their clerks and get very poor administration. Because, as you said, there's 10,000 parishes in England, and I think that includes Wales as well. But and you get a lot of duff ones out of that, but a very small proportion. But out of 10,000, that can amount to quite a number.
But that comes back to something
That
goes back to something we've talked about on previous podcasts, where we've talked about when you give councils the freedom to innovate and to localise, etc., you are going to get some duff decisions in some councils. This is the thing. But those disadvantages of those odd duff decisions, or those odd kind of slightly councils that go slightly awry, are massively offset by the good that the rest of them do. And I think it's that freedom to be able to really get into your local area. Really, if it's an area that has particular issues with crime or whatever else, they can really dig down and invest in those areas.
Yes.
And it's a really important part, because Bill's brought in the political part of it, which is where we want to go to now. So I can talk from my own view. So I wasn't on the parish council, the Inglewood-Tanterton Parish Council that Bill helped set up. It was, I'm going to say from the outside looking in, it was a bit of a basket case in terms of it wasn't doing what it was supposed to be doing. They had lots of people with their own little projects, and it didn't seem to have a coherence about it. And so the Lib Dem group here in Preston went, right, we have been the city councillors for that area for a long time. We're going to come in and want to give it a little bit of direction. And that's when my kind of real love affair with parishes kind of kicked in, because I could do stuff like some things that have taken me years and years and years of fighting to try and get. I could get through suddenly quite easily and make a very tangible difference quite quickly on that parish. But but whatever council you go on, there are going to be some wannabe plonkers. That's that, and there's no other way about it. And that's just human nature. There will be people that think, I know this area, listen to me, and are very forthright. And you saw that in I can't remember where that council was with Jackie, with Handforth or something like that. Yeah, something like that. So
up in Cheshire.
Well, Cheshire's a strange place anyway. Sorry to all our Cheshire listeners, but it is actually it's really important. But Sam, from your point of view, I mean, we'll talk a little bit about how Lib Dems can use parish councils. But actually, do you think Bill was the idea of them being non-political might sound attractive, but in reality, you do need some sort of kind of focus in there?
Yeah, it's interesting. Our parish council is not. Everyone talks about it being non-political, but none of the people on it actually stick to that. So we have 8 Conservative councillors, we have 8 Lib Dem councillors, we have 3 Labour and an Independent. And as much as when I joined, everyone said, "Oh, we're not really that political," and it was the most political council. But we went through a period of having almost an independent majority on the council. So that was at the stage at which I joined, the largest group was the independent group, and it was incoherent. Because there was no guiding force. The independents had formed a bloc, but they didn't form a bloc with a manifesto, with an idea of what they wanted to do. Yeah. And so it had gone from being a Liberal Democrat controlled council, and there have been times when it's been pretty much all Liberal Democrat, to suddenly it was independent. And it went through 4 years of just not getting stuff done.
Yeah.
Because the only way that anyone would ever bring something forward was it was their individual idea.
Yeah.
And then it was a real struggle to persuade, it's 20 councillors, 19 other independently minded councillors that this was a good thing to do. And you don't just have to persuade them that it's a good thing to do. You have to persuade them to pretty much deliver it, because you do have a clerk and you might have staff, but a lot of the job of the parish council is done by the parish councillors. And so, you talked before about messaging and persuading people it's a good idea to have a parish council. If they weren't getting on with things, well, you can't persuade people they're doing a good job if they're not.
Yes.
And when it becomes that sort of independent and loose, and Bill talks about those parochial problems, it does show.
Mike, what's your view on this?
Well, before we got involved, it was a Labour-run council with some Tories on, and we got our first Liberal elected in 1979 as a lone Liberal, and they treated her appallingly. But the next elections in '83, it was during when Labour were falling out amongst themselves, and we, as a town,
that could be any time, Mike. I'm sorry, that could be right now.
Yeah, this is nationally. This is nationally that over, but the town is mainly owner occupied, but it was new, and these people, on the whole, were first time owners in our town at that stage, and so they felt, well, they shouldn't really be Labour anymore, and we were putting out focuses, and so they saw us as, well, they didn't have to vote Tory because they were now house owners, they could vote for us. And so we took over the council in 1983. At that time, we had one part-time clerk, an assistant, and a groundsman. And over the years, we've now grown to a staff of about 30, including youth workers, etc. So it's each time we've expanded the work that's done. We've been coherent because we've had a party direction and a manifesto to stand on, and we knew what we were doing. And we did have a little bit of opposition. One stage we did have a bit of splitting up over Paul Court. That's funny enough, but since we've been 100% Liberal Democrat, we're no longer political within the council. We're all independents, really. Yes. But we obviously are very friendly and we tend to get about 65% of the vote. So we're and most elections, there's been very little opposition standing until last time round. The Tories realised what a power base the town council has been for us. So they put a real effort in and fought every seat, which is the first time that we could have actually lost control of the council. But luckily we managed to hold them off and get 100% again. So
I suppose what's really interesting, because there's been a lot of talk about the future of local government, whether reorganisations and things of the like, where actually one of the things that I don't think people realise is actually if you were to establish a new parish council, and I'm going to bring you in, Bill, now, just to kind of briefly go through how you went about establishing a new council, because I think people would find that quite interesting. But if there's a threat that, say, borough councils might be done away with, or that it's just going to be a single tier council, then actually the parish, local, community, neighbourhood level council will be even more important in that regard. And so I think if you're a Lib Dem there around thinking, oh, that sounds lovely, that sounds like something that my area could really do with. I don't have a defibrillator in my area. That's why can't I not do that? There are ways of setting up parish councils. And so, Bill, I think briefly, because I know it did take you, I think it took a couple of years, did it, to get it on the ground, but kind of briefly, how did you go about that process?
Okay, I think the minimum time that it would take would be 18 months. To go from scratch to your first election. Basically, what we did was we had this ready-made group in existence because of neighbourhood management. So we had a cross-party, non-partisan resident group. When I and some colleagues put the idea of having a parish council, and there was a general feeling, yes, we should. We then went to see the officers in the district council to discuss a timetable and the action that was required. We then set up the councillors as a shadow council. That allowed us to pass a precept, even though none of us had been elected. I mean, it's complicated, but that's the way we did it. We then, during the summer of that year, we put a flyer out to every home. And we had a summer fete in the area, at which we had a marquee and talk to people and so on and so forth. Because the key thing was you have to get a petition signed by 10% of the electors, and that for us meant 600 signatures, which we achieved comfortably. Sorry, the number was 500 and something, but we achieved it comfortably. We then presented that petition to the district council. That was then accepted by them, and then they started a 2-stage consultation process, which the district council had to fund, and that involved them putting out flyers, them having a general communication thing. Following that 2-stage consultation, a recommendation was then put to full council, which was accepted, that we went ahead with local neighbourhood council elections the following May. The so-called shadow council then set the precept, so that was then built into the budget for the district council before actually the council came into existence. We then invited nominations, and the stipulation, although we couldn't enforce this legally, but we did say to everybody, we want you to stand as an individual, no party labels. And that was done at that initial thing. It was contested election. We have 10 councillors. It's a much smaller ones than yours, and it was sort of semi-warded. I think that's the wrong word to say, but you know what I mean. And it was contested in all of those areas. The elections then took place in the May. 10 councillors were duly elected, and then the shadow council stood down.
Yeah. And Sam, I suppose from a Lib Dem point of view, one of the benefits, if you're thinking about setting up a parish council, is actually forcing you to go around, knock on doors and explain the benefits is also a wonderful way of actually putting yourself forward for all sorts of other elections. You look like someone who cares about the community and wants the community to do better. So it's kind of a win-win from that point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I was a parish councillor before I was a borough councillor. Right. And I probably wouldn't have been a borough councillor without what I was doing as a parish councillor. Not least the fact that it said all in all my leaflets as I was trying to get elected Councillor Sam Al-Hamdani, even though I wasn't a councillor for the election I was going for. But it is a real platform. I'm actually going to, hello Conservative Central Office, I'm going to compliment some of your councillors now. Some of the Conservative parish councils in our area have used it really effectively as a platform. Mike mentioned before the parish council is a consultee on planning decisions. Yeah, one of the tools that they use really effectively. So if you're on the planning committee at a borough level, you have a legal responsibility to make a decision that has to legally hold water. So what our 2 parish councillors, or a couple of the parish councillors did was go, I'm going to get on the planning committee for the parish council. And they just sounded off, and they sounded angry about resident stuff. And they didn't have that same kind of legal thing.
It's called.
Yeah. And so they just, they used it as a really effective tool. And, to some extent, one of the real restrictions when you're on a planning committee at a higher level is that legal responsibility. I can't just go, well, my residents don't like it, so I'm voting against it.
Yeah.
On the parish level, they were just going, well, this is an outrage, and then sending round 500 leaflets to the area going, we declared it an outrage and we voted against it on the planning committee. So there is a real sort of on a political level, and this is not but on a campaigning level, it can be used really, really effectively. Yeah. And we looked at what they did and kind of went, yeah, we need to do a bit more of that.
But I suppose one of the key things is that also, and this isn't meant to be dismissive of parishes, but it's an excellent way of seeing if you want to be an elected representative to a different council as well. So we've had both people who have had a go at being a parish councillor, found it wasn't for them, the time constraints and stuff like that weren't right. And so they didn't then go on to apply to be a Preston City or a Lancashire County Council, because it gave them, they didn't not enjoy it, if that makes sense, but they knew that was kind of where they could get to. Because I suppose the important part we haven't mentioned is parish councils aren't paid. Is that the same across everywhere, Mike?
No, they can now legally pay themselves if they wish.
Oh,
yes, there was a time when you could only be paid if you, for some reason, you did something duty outside the parish. And I did know many years ago of a Welsh Labour-run parish council, which was a donut council. I've forgotten the name, something without some town, and they deliberately chose their parish meeting place to be within the town that they were outside, so they could pay each other. Pay them. But now you don't know. You have the power to pay parish council. Very, very few exercise power.
That was going to be my next question. How many actually do pay? Because I've never heard of one.
I think this is a very important. Yeah, I think this is a very important point. I mean, certainly when we did the flyer and did the selling idea. I mean, I've got the flyer in front of me, and I think you might be able to see the word unpaid quite strongly there. Yeah. When we defined what it's a group of unpaid, dedicated local people elected from the local community to act as the voice for that community. And I think that it is the idea of, how many times as councillors do you hear, oh, you're all the same, you're only in it for the money, etc., etc. The one thing you can never accuse a parish councillor of being is being in it for the money. Maybe it's in it for the glory, but not for the money.
Yeah, and I think that's it's a really important, because I also want to talk about how Lib Dems can use it to build as well. So not only is it a great tool to seeing if this is something you would like to do. I mean, there's quite a lot of parish councils do have uncontested seats and vacancies on as well. So it is a chance for you to try it out. By all means, talk to your if you've got your local party, see the ins and outs of it if you're thinking about this fresh. But I assume most of you are listening to this have already thought about this. But also, I'm just thinking, last night, and we're recording this on Friday, is that the Morecambe Lib Dems, the Morecambe and Lancaster Lib Dems, had 2 fantastic election successes, and that was built off them starting on the town council and then taking it on and building upon it. And that it's an excellent way of being a springboard to other stuff. And it can, and I did the reverse way. So I did borough, county, then parish. But there are a lot of people like Sam, start with parish, understand some of the ins and outs. You start to figure out the terminology of planning, of what you can and can't do as an elected representative, and then taking that on. It's a brilliant, and again, this isn't meant to sound dismissive, but it's a brilliant training aid for people who want to be an elected representative. Is that how you see it, Mike?
Oh, yes. Not only that, I mean, particularly for rural parishes, which can be smaller than their district or county ward, they're providing more focal point for your county or district councillor candidate. If and this is, I know I come across quite a number of people say, well, you don't want to fight parish councils politically. But if you've got an activist within a parish and they are named on your focus leaflet, then it's silly not to stand them as a Lib Dem when it comes up to election, because they then have the whole support of the focus team. And they also reflect back what they do. They can do things which the focus, even if you haven't got the borough or the district councillor in that area, you have someone who's actually doing something. So it reinforces itself. And it's no coincidence that we eventually did win the parliamentary seat for 1997, and the seat became known as Yate and Thornbury. Sorry, Thornbury and Yate, both which councils that we have run Thornbury since 1987 and Yate since 1983. Unfortunately, while we hold all the votes in those areas, there is a lot of rural bits outside of it, which we've not been so successful. We did for a period, did have control of South Gloucestershire Council. But there was only one period, and we lost ground elsewhere. We still always held our own areas.
So to summarise this up, I'd like each of you to give your little summary of why Lib Dems should be looking at whether they should be elected onto parish councils, whether they should even think about setting up parish councils. So Sam, let's start with you. What to you is the biggest benefit of parish, neighbourhood, community, whatever councils you wish to call them?
The biggest thing for me that I've done, I said I'm working on the neighbourhood plan at the moment, and I'm quite a planning person. I used to work as a construction journalist. I built my own house multiple times.
I wish that photo frame had fallen off then, Sam. That would have been such funny timing, but it didn't.
But being able to take that level of detail, my parish is a very rural, relatively wealthy area. My borough is quite an area which has a lot of poverty. It's urban, very, very different environment. Being able to really bring kind of, in this case, something with legislative power that's really appropriate to our area, and really be able to drive through things on environmental standards, on planning standards that are just the appropriate thing that our area needs. And I've been able to do that. I wouldn't have stood a chance of doing that at the borough level. Just not an option. As a neighbourhood plan driven by a parish council, I probably, assuming we get to vote it through next year, I'll have done more to change the next 20 years of development in my area than I could do in a lifetime anywhere else.
Mike?
Well, I think town and parish councils are community politics in action. It is the community actually driving things. The fact that they choose to elect Liberal Democrats is all to the good, but it doesn't have to be. I just think we do a better job than anyone else could do. But they have it democratically elected and accountable. The only drawback is we're elected by first past the post.
Absolutely. And Alderman Shannon, finish us off.
Well, I mean, I very much agree. It is community politics in action. That's the whole point, the whole structure for it. What I still think of as my ward, even though I'm not a district councillor anymore, my ward is about 2/3 social housing and 1/3 owner occupied. As a result of that, on average, it's not that deprived. Whereas if you just look at the social housing area, it fits into the 10% most deprived low-level super output areas in the country. So we have these pockets of extreme deprivation alongside much more affluent areas. Since the early 1970s, it's been entirely Liberal Democrat councillors, as a result of which one hesitates to suggest this, but possibly the Labour group have not always given it perhaps the priority that they might have given some of the more city centre deprived areas. So we were able to actually take control ourselves and do some things about some of these issues. And I mean, the other it's the only urban suburban parish council within Preston. There are rural ones, but it's the only one. But where I live now, I'm only about 100 yards away from a patch of public open space that the owner has put up for auction on the 15th of December as land with potential for development. Now, all the people who walk their dogs over it, etc., are totally up in arms about it, but there's nothing they can do other than stand back and watch who bids for it and what price this piece of land goes for. If we had a parish council, we'd be in there, we'd be bidding. And that's the difference about, literally, one hesitates to use the term, but taking back control.
Oh, good grief. I'm not inviting you back on the podcast. How dare you use that line? And also, Bill, I asked for you for a final point and I got 3. So this is
sorry, John.
what I've had to deal with for many a year in Preston. But no, I want to thank Mike, Sam, and Bill for a fantastic discussion on parishes. As always, people comment below. Did you realise the amount of powers that parishes and community councils can have? Make sure you do follow everything to do with the Lib Dem Pod at Lib Dem Pod. We've got lots of stuff going on, and I can't finish this by saying, when this comes out, you do have a chance to go and make a difference in North Shropshire in the by-election. That is happening on the 16th of December. There's something really interesting going on there with rural Tories really, really turning away from them. So if you do get a chance to help out in that by-election, do get down there. Although, do take a jacket. It was very, very cold when I was there. So thank you to our panel. Thank you very much everyone who watched and listened. Do subscribe to us so you make sure you never miss an episode, and we'll be back with another episode very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Bye.